Well, good afternoon. Obviously, received the forecast today. We believe that's good news for Minnesota, good news for Minnesotans, additional revenue projected to come into the state's budget. Obviously, when you look at where the revenue comes from, it comes from Minnesotans. It comes from Minnesotans doing better. It's for the most part from increased revenue collections from income taxes. The bottom line is when Minnesotans do better, the state of Minnesota does better. That will lead me to the only conclusion that I think we together can come to, which is we need to put forward a state budget that puts Minnesotans first. And that's what Republicans will do. We'll put forward a state budget that invests in Minnesotans so that we can continue to grow our economy and continue to do well as a state. Some concerning things, obviously, this revenue forecast, even prior to this with a $1.4 billion surplus, Governor Dayton was still proposing about a $1 billion increase in taxes and fees, still taking more money out of the pockets of Minnesotans. We find that concerning. Hopefully now he can back away from that proposal. He still intends to increase spending about 10%. So the governor continues to want to grow state government faster than the economy is growing, and I think that's out of touch with what most common sense Minnesotans would expect of state government. But we're optimistic. We're optimistic that we can come together, work together to agree on a budget that will invest back into Minnesotans and put Minnesotans first. So we are optimistic. We believe it's good news, and it's a good opportunity for us to put Minnesotans first. Senator.
Well, good afternoon. The Senate thinks it's good news as well. I've been optimistic that we would have a greater surplus than what we did before today, and the Speaker and I were betting about how much more it would be, and I'm not sure who won. I would say I won since I have the microphone, but it does. An extra surplus doesn't solve everything. We still have to balance the budget, and like the Speaker mentioned, the Governor had proposed prior today a 10% increase in spending, and even though we have a surplus, in our minds, that doesn't mean that we should continue to increase spending at rates above what a family would spend. Talk to the average Minnesotan and say, did you get a 7% increase? And that's what we have prior to what the governor was proposing, which is 10%. So it's a good news, the surplus. It makes it easier to balance the budget. If you look at the out years, that surplus continues, so we expect that there should be some real tax relief. But again, we're going to watch spending. We want to make sure that we're not overspending. You heard the governor talk about what we don't know what the federal government's going to do. We could easily have $1 billion or more of shortage in health and human resources down the road, depending on what they do. And how does that affect us? But today we're going to work with what we have today and move that forward. And then whatever the federal government does, we'll adjust to that. But for today, it's good news, and it allows us to do the things that we want to do. We said we want to pass a roads and bridges bill. You should expect that. We want tax relief. We want to fix the health care crisis. All of those should be able to be done this year. So thank you. With that, I think we can take some questions for, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Joyce.
I would just say we're happy with where we're at with the surplus, and I think it's because we've been good fiscal stewards of our tax dollars, and I think that's what the Republicans in the House, and we're happy to have the Republicans in the Senate in control too. And it's interesting, I think if you look at kind of where some of the budget proposals have been in past years, I think that the reason we're in a healthy fiscal state now is because we've put the brakes on some of that excessive spending, and we view it as our job to continue to be fiscally responsible, and the number one priority we have is for the taxpayers of Minnesota and making sure that every policy that we put forward, every dollar we spend, is spent wisely, and we will continue to do that, and we will continue to prioritize the same things that we've been talking about: transportation, tax relief, and fixing the health care situation. So we're happy with where we're at, and we'll continue to work hard to make sure that we are looking out for those taxpayer dollars in the best way we know how.
Caution and uncertainty in it. Do you feel that this whatever budget you guys pass should include money left in the bottom line as a buffer against this, or do you think the reserve is enough to satisfy that uncertainty?
Frankly, we'd like to leave a little more money on the bottom line of Minnesotans. We think the best thing that we can do with the money that we've collected from them, and remember that a surplus is we've collected more money than we need from Minnesotans. We think we should give some of that back, reinvest back in Minnesotans, put Minnesotans first. Growing government at a clip faster than what Minnesota family budgets are growing or what Minnesota's economy is growing is simply unsustainable. And I'll remind folks, I know the governor likes to take credit for the situation that we're in right now, but I would remind you that if we let him go untethered for the last few years and just rubber stamped all of his spending increases, we would not have a surplus today. Absolutely not. We'd probably have a huge deficit. So we don't think that huge increases in spending, in state spending, are what got us here, and I think everyone can agree on that. This really is because we've had some prudent fiscal oversight and not letting the governor overspend. We really need to keep the growth of state government below what Minnesota family budgets are growing or what Minnesota's economy is growing. That just makes common sense. So we think the best thing to do with the surplus is reinvest it back into Minnesotans. Let's give them some of their money back and let them prosper from the hard work that they've done to get us in this situation.
The Commissioner just reminded us that tax cuts count as spending. So how much does this forecast allow in tax cuts or slash spending?
I'll say as much as possible. And one thing I wanted to say about the report too is yes, there is some uncertainty. I think that's accurate. But if you look at what job providers are doing, they're hiring more employees since the election. They're buying more goods and materials. They're buying more buildings. And that came out in that report. And so that is an optimism that we should pay attention to, and also what they're looking for to prosper. And that's why some of our numbers are up. And my hope is that they will continue to be up.
When you say give back to Minnesotans, reinvest in Minnesotans, I've heard in the past you're not talking about issuing Jesse checks. What are you talking about? What does that mean?
Well, that's what we're working on now. We're talking about a number of areas that we want to provide tax relief. At this point, I think we're more general in just saying that we're going to have a significant tax relief package. You've heard us talk about small business property tax relief, ag property tax relief. We talked about Social Security income exemption. We've talked about tax credits for student loans. There's a number of things that we're talking about, but the House and Senate will work together and we'll come up with a plan that we're going to submit to the governor and work with him to get buy-in.
Will we see any reduction in tax rates, or are we thinking just credits?
Let me just jump in back to Mary's question. One thing I wanted to bring up is I think the most significant thing in this forecast is the 2021 increase of $684 million in the budget surplus. I mean, before you had a situation where the amount of money that was available in 2021 was almost exactly equal to what was available in 18 or 19. The fact that the economies and the budget reserve is growing so much more, not the budget reserve, the money available is growing so much more in 2021, makes it a lot easier for us to do tax cuts than we could have done before.
Does this amount of money on, especially in the tails, give you room to make adjustments to tax rates, or is this going to be made through tax credits?
Well, we're obviously going to go through the committee process to make those decisions, and our committee chairs and committee members are going to want to have input on that. And we're not going to say that, it's all going to be here or there. What we want to do is find the best ways of helping Minnesotans out. Remember, we had a tax bill that passed the legislature last year with 89% of legislators voting for it, and the governor vetoed it. So while we increased spending and it was okay for the governor to do all of those things, what the governor did was prevent Minnesotans from getting any of their money back in the last 2 years, and that was concerning. And I think we can't let it go another 2 years without reinvesting back in Minnesotans. We're obviously continuing to collect more money than we need to operate state government. State government is growing faster than family budgets, it's growing faster than Minnesota's economy. It's time to get those numbers in check. And the best way to do that and continue to, it doesn't mean that you have to necessarily always reduce the growth of government. Why don't we increase the rate of the economic growth? And at that time, we can actually reduce tax rates even further by, that's the result of investing back in Minnesotans. Now, our budgeting and scoring doesn't always work that way because we don't do dynamic scoring here, but everybody knows that if we increase the money we give back to Minnesotans and reinvest back in them, that will help grow the economy, which will ultimately help us gain more revenue at the state. So, we've got an opportunity to really put Minnesotans first, and that's what our budget will do.
Mr. Speaker, the governor will term additional spending investments in Minnesota's future, positioning the state for economic growth in the future. Are any of those investments, as far as you and Mr. Majority Leader, are any of those investments reasonable?
I think that we will propose investments as well. I think we will propose investments in K-12 education. We'll propose investments in health and human services. And frankly, those are areas in transportation and roads and bridges. Those are areas I think Minnesotans expect us to invest in. But it also means we need to look at the entire state budget and make sure that we're conducting the business of the state in the most effective way possible, that Minnesotans are getting bang for their buck, that they appreciate the services they're getting. We're doing it efficiently as well. So it's a complex scenario, and we need to just make sure that we're doing our due diligence to ensure that we're using the resources Minnesotans have given us wisely, and we're providing them the services that we think they demand. So we will make investments. What those will be determined over the next few weeks as we go through committee process, but one of the big priorities will be tax relief, giving Minnesotans some of their money back. Governor Dayton shunned Minnesotans and Minnesota taxpayers during the last 2 years by vetoing a tax bill that had 89% support in the legislature. That wasn't putting Minnesotans first. That was putting state government first. And it's time that we focused on let's grow Minnesota family budgets, let's grow Minnesota's economy, and let's let Minnesota's state budget and state government be secondary. Let's put policies forth that will invest in Minnesotans and put Minnesotans first. That's going to be our priority. Senator?
So the governor gave us his first offer, and based on that first offer, and I think where we will begin, I'm convinced that we will find a pathway through. The numbers may not be exactly the same. I believe we will have more tax relief, but some of the other key areas, I'm pretty confident that we can get things done in a timely manner.
Going forward, we asked the governor what's ahead, and he said it gets real now, and so far session has kind of been a honeymoon, lots of bipartisan bill signings. Do you feel like it changes today and going forward now?
He's accurate that it gets real now, but I don't see any reason why the tone has to change. We've done a number of bills already that have passed that I can't say there was 100% support for. You saw Sunday liquor go through yesterday. That was a very divisive issue, frankly, but that one is off the table. Federal tax conformity, we did that early. The health insurance reform and relief bill, that was fairly controversial. That got done as well. And so there's no reason the tone should change. We're going to keep communicating. The governor, I hope, keeps coming to the table. And if we do that, we will get done, and we should get done on time.
I would agree as well. There's no need for the tone to need to change. We have very intentionally set a tone that shows we want to work together. We know that in order to get a state budget, we have to work together to accomplish that. So we have set this tone very intentionally at the beginning of session. I think it shows that we have our sleeves rolled up and we're ready to work with the governor to get the work done for Minnesotans. But it does mean that we're going to need the governor to come our direction a little ways, and it means we're going to have to reinvest some of this additional surplus back into the pockets of Minnesotans. Let's help them out, and let's get government kind of in line with what Minnesotans' expectations are.
Senator Gazelka, you mentioned before that changes to healthcare policy could blow $1 billion hole in the state budget. The speaker didn't really answer this question. Do you think that you should leave some money on the bottom line in case of policy changes on healthcare, on trade?
I'm not sure that he didn't answer. There's things that we don't know. And so his first answer was that we need some tax relief. We had a $2 billion tax increase a little over 4 years ago, and none of that has gone back. In fact, 1% has gone back of that surplus. 1% has gone back. And so that's our first priority. Having a healthy budget surplus, I think, is a healthy thing when you don't know what the future holds. But we're first focused on tax relief, and then we'll work on everything else after that.
Speaker, you said that you don't think the state government should grow faster than Minnesotans' personal income. Contrast that to the governor's 10% proposal. But this very budget forecast predicts about a 9.4 or 9.5% growth in Minnesota's personal income over the next 2 years.
So is the governor's budget larger than that?
It's slightly larger.
Okay.
But it's not a drastic difference.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
And that only takes into account those state taxes. It doesn't take into account local taxes and other taxes that Minnesotans pay. And you know,
And the healthcare access fund.
I think we could go on all after. I mean, the amount of taxes that Minnesotans pay, and I think you know, and I want to be polite, but your question is flawed. If we think that Minnesotans, I mean, I think the average amount of money that Minnesotans pay in can, you know, it can range anywhere from 0 to over 50% of their income that they pay in taxes. And you know, I think what we need to do is appreciate where that money comes from. And respect the taxpayers that pay it in. And yes, Minnesotans want good, efficient service from their government, and I think it's our obligation to provide that, but we need to appreciate the resources they've given us and provide that service very, very effectively, and we can be innovative in the way that we do that, but also very efficiently. And you know, businesses and corporations have had to be creative in the way that they provide the services that they provide, and they're doing it more efficiently, and I think we as government need to do that as well. So that will be part of our budget, making sure that we can operate this government more effectively, but also more efficiently, and that's my goal. But we do want to reinvest back in Minnesotans, and we do want to make sure that it's because of their work that we have this additional resources available. So we need to appreciate that, respect that, and let's reinvest some of that back into them.
I just want to hop into, on that question, you know, I was looking back to the year that Majority Leader Gazelka and I were elected in 2004, and I believe the budget, the general fund budget that year was around 28 billion, and now we're approaching 45. If you look in the out years, it's getting closer to 50 billion, and I don't know that family budgets have increased like that, and so our number one job really is to make sure that we're not, the government isn't growing so fast that we can't keep up with it. We shouldn't be growing government just to grow government. We should be looking at every single taxpayer dollar that comes in, and we should be, as the speaker said, be spending it in the most efficient and effective way possible. We shouldn't always, every time we get money in, look for the fastest way possibly that we can to spend it. That's not our job as fiduciaries of the state.
More questions? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.